The ancient forest stood silent, a world of towering pines and gnarled oaks that had weathered countless storms. I was just a small bear cub, barely old enough to venture far from my mother's side. My name is Luna, and this is the story of how my life changed forever on a night when the sky itself seemed to rage against the earth. The day had started like any other. My mother, Sage, and I had been foraging by the riverbank. The scent of fish and fresh water filling our lungs, the golden light of early evening painted the world in warm hues, and I felt safe, protected by her powerful presence. But nature is unpredictable, and in an instant, everything can change. The storm came without warning. The once clear sky was swallowed by churning gray clouds, and the wind began to howl like a restless spirit. The air crackled with electricity, and the scent of damp earth filled my nostrils. Sage and I knew we needed to find shelter, but before we could move, a deafening crack split the air. A massive tree, weakened by the relentless winds, came crashing down between us. The ground shuddered under its weight, and I was sent tumbling backward, my small body rolling down the slick embankment. By the time I steadied myself, Sage was gone, hidden behind a wall of fallen branches and churning water. I called for her, my frightened cries swallowed by the roar of the storm. Again and again I lifted my voice, but no answer came. The wind carried only the sound of snapping branches, the rush of the swollen river, and the distant rumble of thunder. My chest heaved, breath coming in shallow gasps as panic set in. The world suddenly felt impossibly large, stretching endlessly in every direction. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and every rustling leaf sent a fresh wave of fear skittering down my spine. I had never spent a night without the warmth of Sage's fur beside me, without the steady rumble of her voice telling me we were safe. Rain began to fall, first as a slow drizzle, then in sheets that soaked through my thick fur. I shivered, knowing I needed to move. Sage had always told me that standing still in fear could be just as dangerous as running blind. Taking a shaky breath, I placed one paw forward, then another. The forest had transformed under the weight of the storm. Familiar scents of pine and moss were overpowered by the sharp, bitter tang of overturned earth. Small rivulets carved fresh paths through the underbrush, and once sturdy ferns drooped heavily beneath the downpour. Everything felt different, harsher, less welcoming. I picked my way carefully through the terrain, my steps uneven as my claws sank into the sodden ground. I listened desperately for any sign of Sage, but the forest had fallen into an eerie silence between gusts of wind, the kind of silence that made my fur stand on end. Then, a sound, faint, almost indistinguishable beneath the rain, but distinct enough to send a spike of unease through my small frame. It was a rustling, measured and deliberate, not the erratic motion of wind through leaves, but something else, something alive. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Slowly, I turned my head, scanning the darkness beyond the trees. My nose twitched, but the rain had muddled my senses, making it impossible to decipher friend from foe. Another rustle, closer this time, the underbrush shifted, and then, just on the edge of my vision, I saw them. Eyes. Yellow, gleaming even in the dim light, watching me. My blood ran cold as I recognized the threat. Wolves. A low growl rumbled through the air, barely audible over the storm, but enough to send every instinct in my body screaming to run. My legs tensed, claws digging into the mud, but I didn't move. Not yet. There was more than one. I could hear them now, their footfalls light and careful as they circled. The pack was testing me, waiting to see if I would bolt. If I did, the chase would begin, and I knew I was no match for them. I was small, young, vulnerable. Sage could fight off a wolf, maybe even two, but alone, I had no chance. The underbrush shifted again, and another set of eyes appeared, then another. The wolves moved like shadows, their fur blending seamlessly with the darkened forest. Their bodies were sleek and powerful, a stark contrast to my small, trembling form. The leader, a large male with a thick scar running down the side of his muzzle, took a step forward. His breath curled in the cold night air as he bared his teeth, lips curling into a cruel snarl. I had heard whispers of this wolf, a predator known for his ruthlessness. They called him Shadow. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in a brief, blinding white. In that instant, I saw the wolves clearly, the hunger in their eyes, the way their muscles coiled in preparation to strike. The moment darkness returned, they lunged. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I turned sharply, pushing off with all the strength in my small frame. My paws slipped in the mud, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I could hear them behind me, their paws hitting the ground in unison, their breaths sharp and eager. The world blurred around me as I ran, my lungs burning and my heart hammering. I had no direction, no plan, only the desperate instinct to survive. A sharp pain lanced through my side as something clipped me. A wolf's teeth just missing their mark but close enough to send me sprawling. I tumbled, rolling through mud and leaves, my vision spinning. I barely had time to lift my head before the wolves were on me, their snarls deafening, their eyes alight with triumph. This was it. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But before the first set of jaws could close around me, the forest exploded with a sound so powerful it drowned out even the storm. A roar, deep, earth-shaking, furious. The wolves hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. A massive shape crashed into the clearing, moving with terrifying force. The scent of raw power filled the air, and I barely had time to register the dark, towering figure before it struck. The first wolf was sent flying, slamming into a tree with a yelp. The second barely had time to react before a massive paw lashed out, claws tearing through the night. The wolves scrambled back, their snarls replaced with startled whines. I lay frozen in the mud, breathless and trembling, staring up at the bear that had just saved my life. A bear larger than any I had ever seen, whose name was spoken in hushed tones by creatures across the forest. They called him Titan. Titan stood at the center of the clearing, his hulking frame blocking out the dim glow of the storm-ridden sky. His fur, a deep, earthy brown streaked with silver scars, bristled with raw power. His dark eyes, almost black, held no fear, no hesitation. No, only the quiet confidence of something that had never known defeat. The wolves hesitated, their once mocking snarls, now uncertain growls. They circled, testing the space between them and the behemoth that had disrupted their hunt. Shadow, unwilling to retreat so easily, stepped forward. Rain dripped from his fur, his breath curling in the cold night air as he held his ground. Titan did not move. He simply stood, unmoving as stone, his deep chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. He was waiting, daring them to test him. I had never seen a creature like him. Even Sage, strong and fierce as she was, did not carry the same presence that Titan did. This was a bear that had fought battles, that had walked through blood and fire and come out the other side untouched. The tension in the clearing stretched, crackling like the storm above. Shadow's tail flicked, and for a moment I thought he might call for the attack. Then, with a sharp bark, he signaled the retreat. The wolves backed away, their growls fading into silence as they slunk into the shadows of the forest, their yellow eyes lingering on Titan with reluctant respect. Titan did not watch them leave. He had already dismissed them as if they were not worth his attention. Instead, he turned his gaze downward, fixing his eyes on me, a tiny mud-covered cub at his feet. I flinched, my heart pounding against my ribs, my fur clinging to my body from the rain and the terror that still pulsed through me. Titan said nothing at first. He simply stared, his massive head lowering slightly as he took in my trembling form. Then, with a snort, he turned and began to walk away. I blinked in confusion as the grizzly's great paws sank into the wet earth with each slow, deliberate step. The storm had begun to settle, the wind easing into a restless whisper, but the rain still fell in steady sheets. I hesitated, torn between two choices: stay in this clearing alone, waiting for the wolves to return, or follow the bear who had saved my life. My instinct screamed at me to go after Titan, to cling to the presence of something stronger than myself, something that had just torn my enemies apart without a second thought, but would he even let me? I swallowed hard, my paws aching as I forced myself up. My body protested. I was exhausted, shaken, and drenched to the bone, but I didn't care. With one last glance at the darkness where the wolves had vanished, I took a step after the grizzly, then another, and another. Titan said nothing as I trailed behind him, my small form dwarfed by the giant shadow I followed. I kept my distance, wary of angering the bear that had yet to acknowledge my presence. We moved through the trees, the sounds of the forest growing quieter now that the worst of the storm had passed. The path was unfamiliar, weaving through thick undergrowth and winding slopes, places I had never dared venture before. The further we walked, the more my fear gave way to curiosity. Who was this bear? Why had he helped me? I had never heard of a grizzly interfering with a wolf hunt before. Sage had told me that nature followed rules, that bears and wolves did not mix, that the world was governed by survival, and that each creature had to fend for itself. And yet, here I was, following a stranger deeper into the unknown. After what felt like hours, we reached a rocky outcrop that jutted over a swollen river below. Titan finally stopped, his head tilting slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. The rain had begun to slow, mist rising in tendrils from the damp earth. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet stone. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, unsure if I was allowed to come closer. Titan exhaled sharply, the sound almost amused, as if he could feel my hesitation without even looking at me. "If you're gonna follow me, cub, keep up," his voice rumbled, deep and rough like the earth itself. I stiffened. It was the first time Titan had spoken, and his tone was neither gentle nor cruel. It was simply a statement of fact. I swallowed, finding my voice. I didn't know where else to go. I admitted, my words small against the vastness of the forest around us. Titan finally turned his head, regarding me with an unreadable expression. "That's not my problem," he said. The words were blunt, but they didn't carry the cold dismissal I had expected. He studied me a moment longer, then sat on his haunches, his massive frame shifting effortlessly into a position of rest. I hesitated before cautiously sitting a few paces away. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant rush of the river below. I glanced sideways at Titan, unable to contain my curiosity any longer. "Why did you help me?" I asked quietly. Titan didn't answer at first, his gaze remaining on the horizon. "Because I was there," he finally said. I frowned. "That's not an answer." Titan let out a low, gravelly chuckle, though there was little humor in it. "It's the only one you'll get." I lowered my ears, but something in Titan's tone kept me from pressing further. I looked down at my paws, the weight of exhaustion creeping into my bones now that the immediate danger had passed. I wanted to ask about Sage, wanted to ask if Titan had seen her, if she was safe, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know how to find her." Titan didn't respond immediately. He shifted slightly, glancing down at me with something that might have been consideration, though his expression remained unreadable. "Then you'd better learn how to survive until you do." I blinked, lifting my head. "What?" Titan exhaled, shaking water from his thick fur. "You're small, weak. If you don't want to end up as wolf food, you'll need to be stronger." He turned his gaze back toward the trees as if the conversation no longer interested him. "You have two choices, cub. Go on your own and hope luck keeps you alive, or stay here and learn." My chest tightened. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I had no hope of surviving alone. I had no idea where to look for Sage, no idea how to defend myself if the wolves returned. If I left now, I would be dead before sunrise. Slowly, hesitantly, I nodded. "I'll stay." Titan gave no sign of approval, no acknowledgement that my decision meant anything to him. He simply rumbled, "Then don't waste my time." I shivered, though whether it was from cold or something else I wasn't sure. I didn't know what I had just agreed to. I didn't know who Titan truly was. But one thing was certain. My life from this moment on would never be the same. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the dense canopy, cutting through the mist that clung to the damp earth like a heavy veil, I woke slowly. My small body was curled against the base of a jagged rock, my fur still damp from the night before. Every muscle ached, a deep, dull pain that came from exhaustion, fear, and the lingering cold of the storm. I lifted my head, groggy, my ears flicking at the distant sounds of the forest awakening. Birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind weaving through the towering trees. It was peaceful in a way, but it did nothing to ease the knot of uncertainty tightening in my chest. Titan still sat a short distance away, his massive frame unmoving, dark eyes fixed on the horizon. But despite his presence, I had never felt this kind of solitude before. Even when Sage was quiet, when she left me to explore on my own, I had always known she was close. I had always known that if I cried out, she would come. But now, I wasn't sure if she was even alive. I swallowed hard, pushing the thought away before it could crush me completely. I needed to focus on the present, on whatever this new path meant. Titan had offered me a chance to learn, to survive. It wasn't the comfort of my mother's embrace, but it was something. A lifeline in a world that had suddenly become vast and terrifying. "Are you going to sleep all day?" Titan's gruff voice broke through my thoughts. I scrambled to my feet, wincing as my sore muscles protested. No, I stammered, trying to shake off the last vestiges of sleep. "I'm ready." Titan regarded me with a critical eye, his expression unreadable. "We'll see about that," he rumbled. "The forest doesn't care if you're tired or scared. It doesn't care if you miss your mother. If you want to survive, you need to be stronger, faster, and smarter than anything that wants to eat you." His words were harsh, but there was a truth to them that I couldn't deny. I straightened my spine, trying to look braver than I felt. "I want to learn," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I want to be strong." Something flickered in Titan's eyes, not quite approval, but perhaps a hint of respect. He nodded once, then turned and began to walk. "Keep up," he called over his shoulder. "Your first lesson begins now." And so began my journey with Titan, the most feared and respected bear in the forest. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons learned through sweat, tears, and occasionally blood. Titan was not a gentle teacher, but he was thorough. He taught me how to fish, how to find the sweetest berries and the crunchiest grubs. He showed me how to read the wind, how to listen to the forest's